if you weren't? Okay, Eric and Bob. So what we did last month was go through the implementation next steps on our strategies, and it's a lot. So we're going to continue what we did last month. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly go through the presentation again. So for those of you who were here, it's going to be a little repetitive, but please stop me if anyone has any questions. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Wendy has put the slide deck in the chat if you would like to follow along on your own. Otherwise, I should be sharing my screen. You should all be seeing the green links page. So if you're able to open the slide deck and you want to click on the first slide, that's where you can access all the hyperlinks to the tools that we're using today. And I wanted to quickly review some Q&A from last month. We had some feedback from the different working groups, some questions on this part of our process. And so the first one, how does today's equitable implementation relate back to the not so great outcomes we identified last month? So if you'll remember, in June, we went through the impact mapping and we identified pros and cons that may come out of the strategies. And so just want to make sure you all know that nothing is being lost, and that really those cons are part of what we're addressing today in these equitable implementation next steps. So please be considering those as we're brainstorming the potential next steps. And we'll also be bringing them back next time when we talk about indicators and accountability. And then we had a second question that was, how is our exercise today not simply signing other folks up when we talk about implementation partners and telling them that, they need to provide funding? And that's really not what this is at all. This is just an activity where we're brainstorming potential partners for inclusion. In no way are we assigning work. We're not putting anyone's name down on any documents. It's just a list of organizations and stakeholders that we want to consider contacting to assess their interest as we begin this implementation journey. And that's what's going to ensure that it is inclusive and community owned, that we are including the folks who maybe haven't been included in the past in the planning processes. And then the last question is a good one. What's the difference between community organization and an equity partner? So again, when we go through the exercise, we're asking for potential city departments or agencies, any nonprofit groups or private stakeholders. And then we have kind of an extra question, can you think of other equity partners? Now, that doesn't mean that we haven't already considered them in the other categories. It's just making sure that we are prioritizing those groups that represent specific neighborhoods or regions of the cities, or groups of individuals with a focus on those communities. And for our purposes, community organizations have a broader scope or mission, and then the equity partners, it's just an opportunity to consider the ones that center equity in their mission so we can reach those communities that we're prioritizing. So any questions or comments on any of that? Okay, excellent. So today we're on meeting number 2 of implementation. I'm just going to quickly go over the agenda and the objectives. They're pretty much the same as last month. I'm going to review the framework once again and introduce the activity where we're talking about readiness, equitable next steps, implementation partners, and just not spending a whole lot of time on the funding and financing. That's just if anyone has any great ideas, we want to capture them here. And then for our ground rules, you've seen these all year. Please be present, be respectful, recognize that each one of us brings a different level of expertise and a different perspective, and we really want everyone to speak up because there is no one person on this team that has all the answers. So each one of you is here because you bring your own very important ideas and perspectives. And then be additive, not repetitive, bring new ideas, You can read through these. They're the same as last time. And we do want, these online meetings, we're very used to them, but any kind of response is great. Thumbs up, thumbs down, waving, nodding, cameras on, as much as we can interact with each other, it really helps us get through the meetings and making this the most effective use of all of our time, which is very valuable. So on to where we are in the process. We are still in plan development, but we're almost there, I promise. Next, we'll be putting, over the fall, our office is going to be working to put together a draft of the plan and then get the community feedback and put it up to council next spring. So pretty exciting. We're getting there. Once again, moving through the draft structure, we're all the way down through all of these very important components that you guys have been very diligently working on with us. So we're down to implementation. And again, that overarching question is, how are we going to equitably implement, measure progress, and ensure accountability in this plan? Where we are in strategy refinement, we went through the impacts and the impact mapping. We looked at the outputs and outcomes of each of those strategies, and that's what we're considering today as we talk about the equitable implementation and accountability framework. So just to remind you, for those of you who weren't here last month, these are all the components that we're trying to get at as we develop the strategies. And today we're talking about readiness, equitable next steps, implementation partners, and the funding and financing mechanisms. And then next time we'll be talking about accountability and transparency and the indicators. And these other components that are in smaller font, the timeline and the costs and the city steward, those are things that we'll be working on internally to identify the best approach for each of the strategies to ensure their success. So those 4 components that I mentioned that we're talking about today, these are the definitions of them, and I'll be going into just a little more detail, but again, most of you were here last month, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but we're working on the subcomponent level. Just to remind you, each strategy has several actions that are rolled up in them. Sometimes it's just 1 or 2, but sometimes it's 4 or 5 or even 6. So we're looking at each subcomponent as its own activity, and that's where we're identifying the status of that subcomponent, the next steps that need to be taken, what partners need to be involved or could or should be involved, and any potential funding or financing ideas. So that's the kind of format of the strategy itself. And in terms of readiness, what this means is, what's the status of each of those strategy subcomponents? So the key question here, what is the most appropriate readiness category? Some of them are already ongoing, underway. Maybe it's a piece of it's being done and we want to kind of add some steps to it, but it's still already underway. Maybe it's just ready to go. It's all lined up. We just need the capacity and the resources to get it going. Maybe it's aligned for implementation in another plan. Maybe it's in RVAH2O, maybe it's in Richmond 300, maybe it's in another plan that you're aware of. And we need to make sure that we're not, that we're aligning our work and not making it duplicative. And then maybe there are some where there's some city action needed. Is there a policy or some kind of ordinance or even just making it a priority from higher up. And then maybe there's a state action before we can get going at all. Maybe there's some legislation that we need to wait for. So we want to make sure we capture that. We know we're very informed about how ready this strategy is. Then the next question is equitable next steps. That's our, what are the 1 to 3 key next steps that we can take to equitably implement the strategy? And again, you'll want to remember that equity screening tool that Wendy will put in the chat, and it's also the link to it's on that first slide. This was something developed earlier this year. You guys were involved in that, and it asked some really good questions to make sure that we are centering equity in our next steps on each of the strategies. So that's where the bulk of our time is in these breakout sessions. But we're going to move through pretty quickly today. So make sure that we are really thinking through what are the most important. If we were to hand these strategies off to some kind of a task force, what do they need to get going? We want to answer that here. And then in terms of the implementation partners, again, this is just a brainstorm to think about who needs to be involved in the implementation of the strategy for it to be successful. So it's, community organizations, city departments, maybe there are some private sector businesses or even organizations or representative groups that should be involved in the conversation. And of course, we want to be asking additional questions like who could benefit from the success of this action, because sometimes that helps to get things moving a little faster, or what frontline or historically underrepresented community members and organizations should be included in this conversation and asked to the table. And then the final one is that funding and financing mechanisms. And, this is where this is going to take a lot of work, obviously. We can't, the transition to a net zero resilient Richmond can't be funded entirely by local property taxpayers. So we really need to identify those creative approaches and strategic investments by both the public and private sectors. This is a community-owned plan, so if you know of other grants or partnerships or examples that have been successful elsewhere, we just want to capture that information so we have the best. We're off in the right direction. But we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. So when we go through the activity, don't think that we need to check every box. This is really just, our best brainstorm to put the best foot forward. So the activity today is the same as last time. We're going to break up into 3 groups though. So we'll get through them a little more quickly. And you will be walking through that spreadsheet again, the Google Sheet. Wendy put it in the chat so you can follow along. Your facilitator will also be sharing their screen and typing in the 4 components. Once again, readiness, next steps, partners, and potential funding and financing. So I know I went through that really quickly. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Great. All right. So on slide 19, if you have the deck up and you want to type your name in under the sign up, I am going to be covering objectives 1 and 2, the subcomponent or the subcomponents that weren't covered last time. Wendy is going to be covering objective 3, and then Brianne and Kendra will be in another breakout room covering objective 4. So if you want to put your name in there or call it out and Wendy can type it in, otherwise we will just divide and conquer. So it's 1:14 or 11:14, and at 11:20 I'm going to go ahead and send you into your breakout. So feel free to take a quick break and we'll send you on your way.
Let us know if you have a preference and I can put it down. If not, it will be a sign.
All right, so I think I have us divided up pretty well. In the top right corner, you'll see when you go into your breakout, for those of you who aren't with me, there's a red leave button. If you click that, you're going to leave the meeting, but next to it, you'll see a return to main room. So if for any reason you want to come back to the main room early or you want to join a different group, feel free to come back at any point. We have an hour and a half to get through these. So your facilitator is going to move through the subcomponents, and spend less than 10 minutes on each one. And then whenever you're done, come back and maybe I'll even finish a little early, but we just want to keep an eye on the clock. And I'm going to go ahead and open the room. So as folks come back from break, you can go ahead and get started, and I'll see you in at 12:50. All right, so here we go. Okay, I think we did it. So I've got Doug and Bob and Joe and Jeanette. So I think we all know each other. Just to remind you all, Jeanette's with the schools, Joe's with RVAgreen, and I know you need to leave early, so thanks for joining us as long as you can. Bob.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you could be here. And then Bob's city engineer representing DPU, and then Doug also with DPU representing water. So what we're going through today is objective. We did 1.1, we got through 1.2. 1.3 is municipal climate impact mapping. Establish a protocol for tracking greenhouse gas emissions and planning for climate impacts. So this first subcomponent says create a departmental greenhouse gas tracking protocol to identify reduction opportunities and publicize key performance indicators quarterly, incorporate the data and equity into performance-based budgeting. So this, there's some legislation in the Virginia Energy Plan that asks for an inventory of greenhouse gas emissions using a method determined by the DEQ. Really, I'll just let you know in terms of where we are on this, our office does track our annual emissions. So it's a process to get all the waste tickets and figure out what our, emissions are from what's being landfilled, and get all of our electric and natural gas usage, and then track that, and then our fleet, our gas and diesel usage, and tracking all of that. So we are tracking the city, and again, this is just city government, municipal climate impact mapping. This isn't for the whole city on this one. But what this strategy is suggesting is that we, by department, get a little more, have a better understanding of where our greenhouse gas emissions are coming from, and incorporate those into some kind of a reporting method. So whatever we put down here as next steps, we want to make sure that it's, something we can actually commit to. So I think it's ready to go. The data's out there. What do you guys think would be the first step to coming up with this protocol? And Jeanette,
hey, Dawn, this is Joe. I have just a general question here. Is any consideration being given to the emissions by the surrounding counties?
Well, the surrounding counties are tracking their own footprint. And this is just measuring what we are based on our own usage, not what's out there in the air, but like based on our own electric use that we're drawing from Dominion and looking at their grid mix and figuring out what contribution are we making to the carbon footprint.
Okay, understood.
I had one question. You say report emissions by neighborhood is possible. I guess, what's your definition of neighborhood? Is it census tract, voting district, council district?
So that was a comment that came back from the community engagement period. They were saying that it would be interesting if at some point we would be able to report the emissions generated at the neighborhood level. I'm going to say that's not possible right now. Maybe that's down the road, but that's also considering, I don't know how the city would divide up our usage unless we were looking at where the buildings were that are using the energy. And I mean, fleet is all over the place, so I don't think we could track fleet by neighborhood. Waste tickets, those loads are all combined, so I don't know that we could measure that by neighborhood.
The only way that I would think that it could be done would be to apportion the total usage based on census data, or maybe zip code, but census data would make more sense, I think.
Yeah, just pointing out the term neighborhood is somewhat of a nebulous term. I guess there are, in GIS, there are more defined, I guess, geographic subdivisions.
So, if each of you were responsible for reporting either, obviously it'd be hard we have a lot of work to get the first one out there, but if it was like a, I don't know, semi-annual or, I mean, quarterly, I think would be tough. But maybe if we even just started with annual by department, what would that look like? What kind of reporting and tracking do you do already that this could potentially tie into? And Jeanette, for schools, you know,
Mhm.
what do you guys do in terms of reporting carbon footprint and energy reporting?
Well, I enter all the the natural gas, water, sewer, electric into a utility module that we have with our work order system. So I can create reports quarterly or, annually is more like it, because then you get a better snapshot of how you did that year. The problem is I get the third party bills from the DPU that, I mean, it is what it is. I get it like 30 to 60 days after the event. So I'm usually behind. So I'm just now working on June bills and August, but that's just the way of it, It's not online like Virginia Powers are or
Right.
Dominion. Yeah. So,
Right.
but it works. I mean, we can see, which trouble buildings, that we might have some, excessive water usage and things like that. It's measurable. We can see if we've made some energy management programming changes on the system, regarding runtime, set points, various little tricks, and, just see if they work. So
maybe it's just an annual report right now. We figure out how to break it up by department. So I'll go ahead and put,
Yeah, I think somehow you got to link up your energy cap database information with GIS, location-based information. Like I say, whether that's by census tract or however, but you need to, I guess, link your accounts in energy cap probably, which is where you're getting, I guess, the information from to the GIS database to view it spatially. So.
okay, and then, oh, did someone have something to add? And then what kind of reporting would this make sense? What would we put this with in terms of some kind of an annual report? As we identify reduction opportunities and publicize, well, at least say KPIs quarterly. I think that's a lofty goal, but incorporate data and equity into performance-based budgeting. Okay, well then the third one is more like identify existing reporting to align with. What do you all see as equity gaps or disparities that this could address?
Well, Don, this is Joe. Sadly, the Housing Authority does track utility consumption fairly well, but we're not relating it to any sort of emissions. And there's roughly 4,000 units of public housing, which is about 10,000 residents. So I don't know, that to me is a disconnect there.
Yeah. Okay, so any thoughts on how we could consider that in an equitable, how we could prioritize that in rolling this out? I I think maybe it is, like we can look at our city buildings and we can look at our, you know, plants, but maybe because that's easiest, right? Because we already have that data and it's easy to start with. But maybe if we're really trying to be equitable, we start with RHA and we do a better job of coordinating with schools. That's where the kids are, and it's in the neighborhoods. So maybe this is where we could start doing a better job.
Yeah, there might be, some collaboration that would need to take place with you guys. And maybe the RPS would be the way, or with some other city agency. We do have some energy conservation measures in place, but again, it's relating the consumption data to emissions. And I don't know, maybe there's a template that the housing authority could follow based on one of the other groups here.
I like that.
But I do think it would take some collaboration with our people and your people, so to speak.
Absolutely.
And our finance division, does a lot of the tracking because of the cost.
Sure.
So that might be the natural group. Of course, someone like myself could also assist, but our finance people are generally keeping tabs on the consumption. So, that group would maybe need to collaborate with one of the city's group to try to capture this information.
Yeah, great point. So for partners, RHA Finance Department, Jeanette, are you the person?
Yep.
Schools?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to share my data, with with you guys, no problem. Yeah, maybe
cool.
we could, combine it somehow or in the same platform, because I know you guys use Energy Cap, I use Utility Direct. So, I mean, it's two different animals, but I'm sure they deliver the same types of reports. And we might be able to take that data and massage it into something standard,
Mhm.
universal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, we have a couple of guys in the finance group that they're accountants, but they're being counting these consumption figures, and then we sub-meter our apartments on electricity. They're fed by master meters, and we get some raw data from Dominion Power, and also through DPU. So that's where we'd have to start.
Okay.
And I can give you name at some point, put some names out there that would maybe be able to work with you.
Can you think of any other equity partners who might want to be involved in this?
Nothing comes to mind immediately, but let me think on that.
Bob and Doug, what are your thoughts in terms of internal reporting and protocols and who should be involved in this?
I mean, we track consumption also. I mean, it seems like if you could tie this all together somehow, you could kind of go from there. I know that's maybe oversimplifying it, but I mean, all of us are tracking consumption. So seems like we could hopefully tie it all together in a similar platform where everybody could take advantage of the data.
Yes. All right. I guess in terms of equity partners, from schools and RHA, do you have any engaged, stakeholders who ask for this kinds of information or would like to be part of this conversation?
I'll
Yeah.
have, oh, sorry.
No, I was just saying, I would, like I said, I'll have to think on that to see who would maybe be another party. We have developers that we work with who I would classify as stakeholders, but I don't think we've been working with them on on an emissions level. So that would be some new thinking.
Yeah, maybe procurement. We would have some kind of protocol that would go into contracts or something.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Good point. Yeah.
What were you gonna say?
I lost it.
Oh, sorry. All right. Funding and financing, any great ideas? I think it's mostly our budgets.
I
Grammatic.
just said you might want to add DIT to your city departments.
Yeah,
Like
great.
GIS, I guess Steve Waldron's still, I guess, the lead GIS guy.
Yep. Yep. Great idea. Okay. All right, then let's move on to the second subcomponent. So incorporate a review of city operations every 5 years to identify opportunities to address climate impacts and incorporate climate projections into land use planning, building regulations, and capital investments prior to implementation. Someone said we need consequences for poor performance, so that's that accountability piece combined with benchmarking. People are concerned that every 5 years isn't enough. And budget windows are, even more difficult to align with if this is only periodic. Do you think this is ready to go or aligned with something else, some other? For those of you who are involved with budget requests and CIP planning, how often does that take place?
Usually starts in the fall, and goes all the way to the end till April.
And
When
is
the
it
when the budget gets passed.
is it a 2-year cycle?
Well, they're supposed to submit a 5-year, but that changes over time as needs change and so forth.
And Bob, it's the same. with the
Yeah,
2
I mean, they have like a master 5-year plan and then they tweak on that.
Yeah, we review.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just based on needs.
Yeah, we review ours annually. And then
I'm going to say some kind of a checklist or worksheet be reviewed with annual requests. That's just an idea, but I don't know. Anyone have any other ideas?
So are you talking about a checklist of all the greenhouse gas projects, for tracking or reduction or what? A checklist for what exactly aligned with the budget?
That's a great point. I should put that as number 2. So I think that the intern step here is figure out what we're tracking. So if we did come up with a protocol, once we establish this protocol, then I think the things that we're going to want to, waste streams, certainly construction and, new buildings and all that kind of stuff. And our fleets. I think those are the three categories that we want to look at the impacts. I don't know how to incorporate climate projections into land use planning and building regulations. But yeah, so we'll just say identify what we are viewing.
Yeah, some of that information can maybe be identified in the design phase of various building projects. And that could be municipal buildings, but it can also be housing. Design engineers, especially if they are lead engineers, that can quantify some of that information.
Yeah, and actually, hey Irina, how are you? We are covering objectives 1 and 2. If you wanted to do 3 or 4, I could send you into one of the other rooms.
This is great, unless you think the other rooms need people. I did have a question though. Sorry for interrupting you.
What's your question?
Okay, so column C, the first note for the second subcomponent is need consequences for poor performance.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just trying to figure out what exactly that means. So poor performance meaning failure to establish a protocol for tracking emissions or failure to limit emissions. I think what that's saying is consequences for failure to adequately track emissions, right?
I think so. So what we have talked about on this strategy is that, once we create this kind of departmental protocol for tracking emissions, we have it citywide, but we don't have it broken down further. So someone needs to think about, okay, what exactly is this? How are we going to start measuring our emissions departmentally and incorporate it into evaluations and, budget requests and things. So that's one big question mark. And just to catch you up, when we were considering equity, we thought really what's important is that we prioritize the schools and public housing, because that's how we can, get at the equity component more quickly rather than just kind of focusing on the stuff we already track with our buildings. Okay, so that's subcomponent 1. Subcomponent 2 is like, okay, well, once we figure out, how we're tracking all of this in a little more detail than we're doing now, how can we incorporate some kind of review process every 5 years to identify climate impact and projections? And so first we talked about the CIP budget requests, and then we thought, well, we really need to identify what are we trying to review? Is it fleet purchases and fleet emissions? Is it our waste stream from all of our buildings? Is it new buildings and new projects? So once we figured that out, then we were like, well, maybe there's some kind of a checklist or a worksheet that could be reviewed. And I think with procurement, like a procurement policy would have something requiring contracts to incorporate some tracking and things. So that's as far as we got. But those notes and comments that you were referring to, someone said that in a previous working group meeting in May when we were prioritizing. They said we really need consequences for poor performance. And I'm not sure how to address that. Does anyone here have thoughts?
Well, so I don't know how to do that yet, but I actually do think that's something that's really worth considering. Just for a little bit of context. So Richmond 300, you know, the city's master planning process, which the plan is great. Plan is phenomenal. The city currently has 42% canopy cover. Richmond 300 commits the city to getting up to 60% with a minimum of 35% in any one neighborhood. And the downtown, what are they calling it? City Center Small Area Plan that just went out for comment. The comment period's now closed. I calculated it, and you know, this is like a city plan. They have 6% canopy coverage on this proposed plan, which means, okay, so they're not following Richmond 300. And I think like that is something that these are very ambitious goals in this, you know, this whole climate action plan, but it doesn't mean anything if departments aren't really on board. And I'm not a big fan of, you know, just using the stick and whacking people with it, but you know, this is ambitious. Departments are going to be reluctant to do all that they can because this is a lot of work, but it really is not going to be but so beneficial if you don't have an adequate picture of what's happening in every department. So, you know, as someone who doesn't work in the city, I don't know what ways, what are some meaningful consequences that aren't going to like, you know, harm the operations and efficiency of a department or like cause people to lose their jobs. But I think that's something that's worth thinking about a little bit more, that hopefully, you know, the city employees here might have some ideas on.
Maybe consequences is a strong word.
Okay, I think that that's definitely something to capture and think about. I think that's why it's suggested that we incorporate this with KPIs and benchmarking and evaluations, you know, to make it have a little more enforcement behind it.
Okay, that makes sense.
But I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what the consequences are. I think the transparency is what's important.
Right. And I mean, I think there, you know, it could be something like, look, your department can't do this other thing you need to do until you've, you know, submitted your data. Like, I don't know. Okay, in Northern Virginia, where people have to get their cars' emissions inspected, you can't renew your car's registration until you get your emissions inspected. So, and you know, you need to get your registration renewed, so you're going to do it. I don't know if there's anything like that for city departments, though.
Yeah, maybe it's an AR or some kind of new policy. Okay. So then, is there anything else we want to capture on this one in terms of next steps? All right. Partners, is it the same as before? Different departments, procurement and developers, contracts, any equity partners? You know, as I talk to different citizens who contact us and want to be involved and help prepare this, you know, for those of us, actually everyone here works for government, we're all on the same side. We all want to get this done, but when we work for government, we know that there are, you know, certain barriers that prevent us from doing it as easily as everyone would like us to. So I feel like the more we can keep educating and opening up the conversation and letting people who who are passionate about this help. That's why this is a community owned plan. Like if they can be part of the solution, then we've got more resources and we've got more buy-in and we've got more of a priority from administration when they hear it from, you know, taxpayers. So I'm always trying to think about who else we could include outside of departments.
Well, what about the large companies in Richmond, Altria? Where's my camera? Oh, there it is.
In terms of best practices, I think that's a good idea. Because they're already doing a lot of this stuff. So, yeah, making them part of the solution, I think, is a great idea. Funding and financing, I guess it's still city. Okay, well then let's move on to objective 1.4. So this one is municipal resilient infrastructure assessment. Conduct a climate vulnerability and risk assessment of all city property, including buildings and parcels. Identify and prioritize properties for specific resilience projects. So if you'll remember back in January, we did that vulnerability and risk assessment. So I think we're kind of ready to go. We have some preliminary documentation. I have a bunch of notes here. I'll just read it to you. So someone said, use the vulnerability report for engagement and communication. Develop a prioritized list of risk mitigation priorities shaped by the magnitude of consequences, the time frame of anticipated impact, and the reversibility of maladaptive investments. Identify infrastructure planning and design improvements that address current pain points like nuisance flooding, withstand extreme weather and recurring events, such as developing design guidelines reflecting updated floodplain mapping and projected sea levels. Incorporate blue-green infrastructure methods that make the most of the natural landscape, especially for water management, and update communications platforms and operations practices to reflect the likelihood of more frequent extreme events and changes to standard practices. Provide local job training and employment opportunities related to resilient infrastructure, such as conducting resilience audits, hotline operations, and include a social equity lens such that each project supports long-term resilience to climate and weather risks, as well as positive outcomes for residents, particularly vulnerable populations. Define project goals upfront and measure the associated outcomes of infrastructure investments so that strategies can be updated and improved over time to meet the needs of each community and local economy. So someone did our work for us. There's a lot in there. I think that is a great start. Any thoughts on what would be some next steps, or what else might we want to add to an implementation plan for that? So for those of you within the city, there is a facilities assessment that's done how often? Is it every 5 years?
Are you talking about city buildings?
Well,
We
any of
just
them?
Don, we just went through a pretty extensive vulnerability assessment. One of our engineering consultants, and part of that's, aligning the assessment with our CIP schedule. So we just, like I say, we just went through it. It's not an annual thing per se, but it was an extensive process that we just went through here recently.
Yeah, it's probably done formally for DPU about on a 10-year cycle, and it's something that's sort of in the front of our mind when we look at individual projects that we incorporate, what we know about vulnerabilities and try to mitigate them to the extent we can. So it's
Is there some kind of
reviewed
a,
formally at like 10 years, but it's also sort of an ongoing process.
I believe schools currently has either an RFP or it's been awarded currently. So we're on track for that to be done.
what's the RFP for?
A facility assessment. But I haven't read the RFP, so I'm not certain that, it might be equipment, not necessarily vulnerability of the, the building itself, but the
Right.
equipment in it.
So need to incorporate resilience language into the current facility assessments. And so, Bob, when you said that with each new project, you are looking at resilience measures, is there something formal in writing or some kind of a checklist, or what are you looking
Well,
at?
I guess, for example, like at the wastewater plant, we know the plant is in the 100-year floodplain. So when we, case in point, we got a project that's in late stage design right now to upgrade our thickening and dewatering centrifuges. So in looking at those two buildings in that project, we're looking to say, okay, if the electrical gear, the motor control centers and switchgear are currently in a place where they're, susceptible to flooding, can we relocate them to a little higher elevation to potentially get them out of the 100-year floodplain? So in the case of one of the buildings, we ended up designing a new little, add-on electrical building, and we put it up higher to get it out of the floodplain. So
Okay.
that's an example of kind of an ongoing
Right.
thing that we do.
Can you think of any equity gaps that this strategy could address? I guess in this language, they talk about job training. I'll leave that alone. I can do that later. How about implementation partners? Obviously, it's E and DPU and TPS and TPW. And so for RRHA, who is doing your CIP projects? Is that Bob's team, or do you do your own? Is it, who oversees that?
I couldn't quite hear the question, Dawn.
I'm just wondering, in terms of resilience, looking at resilience in your new development or even just your properties in general, who would be responsible for doing those kinds of facilities assessments for existing and new properties?
Well, we typically farm that out to a consulting engineer, and what you guys were talking about just a little bit ago, we do a 5-year physical needs assessment on the existing properties. And, that includes looking at roofing, building infrastructure, HVAC. But I would say that would not actually be done in-house, but we do have a contracting unit that would be looking at resilient design as we move forward to redevelop.
Okay,
So,
great. I like
we
that.
do have a contracting unit that is involved with that sort of thing. But normally that would be done with consulting engineer partners.
And do you have like homeowner associations or neighborhood groups that get involved in facilities issues?
Well, as part of the capital fund planning process, HUD requires that we solicit community input. And that's pretty well detailed and documented when we go about the capital plan, projections and things that we intend to do. But yes, there are each family development like Hillside, Gilpin, Mosby, etc. They have local groups within those developments that kind of is the leadership for the residents, and they do interact with. It's like a tenant council association, and the housing authority, meets with them regularly. But I don't think resilient design is on the radar screen with those groups at the moment.
Right. Got it. Okay.
But there is some infrastructure there that this information can be dispersed to and discussed.
Yeah, that's great to know. Thank you. Okay.
Angela Fountain, it would be the place to start too with that, because she's snapped into all those groups.
Great. All right.
And with that, Dawn, I've got to sign off. But I
Thank you.
enjoyed
That
being
was
with you all this morning, and
Yeah,
look
that was
forward to
really-
the next.
Thank you so much, Joe. Have a great day.
All right,
Take care.
y'all too.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right. Then the second one is identify and prioritize properties for specific resilience projects. Anything we want to add to this? We have some notes here. Consider interdependent infrastructure. I think that's more of like a step. We have SB 963 establishes the Commonwealth Efficient and Resilient Buildings Board to advise on accelerating improvements to state buildings to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve resiliency. So maybe that's a step, is look to that for guidance. Any other thoughts on that one? All right, then we'll jump on to strategy 2.1. So residential energy burden. Implement measures to reduce the energy burden of Richmond's most, well, Joe just left, of Richmond's most vulnerable communities and improve. Oh, wait, this is done. What am I doing? We've done 2.1. Looks like on 2.2, this one is about commercial energy efficiency programs. Develop policies, incentives, and financing mechanisms to improve commercial energy efficiency, offer assistance and technical expertise to those that are financially challenged, and facilitate workforce development. So this one's done, except for this last subcomponent that says workforce development, encourage builders and developers to hire small women and minority-owned businesses. I guess last time no one had any suggestions on implementing that besides identifying some organizations to work through. Anyone have any other thoughts on that?
Maybe there could be some kind of reward for awarding a contract to a SWAM. Not financial, but, you proceed with a project and you have SWAM contractors or certain percentage of your workers are minority contractors or what have you. I don't know.
I like where you're going. I think it's an idea, something to think about.
I just know, when we are putting something out for bid, if the SWAM isn't available, their contractors have to be, 90% or something,
Mhm.
Of the, not necessarily the person that wins the contract, but the people they hire to do the work have to be a certain percentage.
So Bob, on city contracts, I
Something
know
like
we go through that. If the award goes to one that isn't a SWAM business, is there we just have to show that the due diligence was done?
Well, pretty much any large procurement solicitation, whether it's construction or a services RFP or whatever, is assigned a minority business subcontracting goal by the Office of Minority Business Development. And that, it could be anywhere from, typically 10% to 20 or more percent. On the case of the 3 recent schools, they assigned a 40% goal to that,
So
which
the
was
city does a
a
good
little
job of it.
ambitious, but
Yeah.
but typically a DPU project probably has somewhere between a 10 and a 20% minority business goal for a DPU construction project.
Mhm.
And then that's looked at through, if we do a pre-qualification, then, the contractors are expected to make a commitment in that pre-qual, and then when they submit their bids, we're looking to see that, their bids are in line with their previous commitments, and then it gets monitored. They got to submit a monthly report to OMBD every month outlining their payments to their minority business subcontractors.
So we have
city's got a fairly well established.
Yeah. So
It's
that's
not as broad as SWAM though. I mean, it doesn't really. It's a minority and emerging small business, which is tied to the size of the company and certain city enterprise zones.
okay.
But, I guess just a non-minority woman-owned business doesn't really count for anything under the city's program.
Yeah. So I'm just looking at this strategy. This is commercial. Offer assistance and technical expertise to those that are financially challenged and facilitate workforce development. So I'm not sure how to kind of connect those dots, what the city can do to help these small businesses that are doing weatherization projects and, I'm not sure. I'm not a workforce.
Part of it's just trying to identify, are there businesses out there that could participate, and then trying to link up, make sure that they're aware that, if we develop some program, that it exists, and, that it's a business opportunity for them, and try to encourage them to participate in it. And that's the type of outreach that OMBD,
Mhm.
does on a pretty regular basis.
Great. Hey, Wendy, are you guys done early?
Yeah, we finished up, and then Joshua had to leave to go to another meeting. Well, Michael had to leave right at the very beginning, so he wasn't able to help. So, but I think Fred is back here with me. So
Great. Well, then you can help us. So,
okay.
Fred, we were talking about this commercial energy efficiency programs, develop policies, incentives, and financing mechanisms to improve commercial energy efficiency, offer assistance and technical expertise to those that are financially challenged, and facilitate workforce development. So I'm curious what Dominion does in those areas. We were talking about city contracts.
Well, most of our programs, they really can't handle any kind of municipality. They would be deemed, I guess, non-jurisdictional.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have programs for business, whether it's a small business improvement, as far as helping them to purchase energy efficient items for the business. Incentives for some of our larger commercial customers, our prescriptive program. So we do have programs out there. They're not 100% free to the customer, but they provide incentives to help with the cost.
Great. Yeah, I think it's more about the city promoting those programs.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put Dominion. Great, good timing. All right, well then we'll jump on to 2.3. So this is construction and energy code enforcement. Prioritize the most recent energy requirements in all new construction and site plan approvals. The first subcomponent says facilitate energy code adoption by working with allied organizations to encourage the Board of Housing and Community Development to adopt the most recent IECC for all commercial and residential buildings. Is this ready to go? Who here knows more about energy codes than me? Some of the notes were phase in code requirements that new buildings match total water consumed with water obtained from rain, reuse, or returned to the original source. And another note that says require all rehabilitation tax credit projects and low-income tax credit projects utilize low-flow fixtures and enforce on the permits. So consider financial and non-financial incentives. I know that the energy code is one piece of it, but this second subcomponent, Fred, did you put something in the chat?
Yeah, it's just a link to all of our programs and their descriptions, whether
Great.
it's residential or non-residential. But it gives some detail about all the different programs that are currently offered.
Great, thank you. In there. All right, so then with the energy code, once we have the most up-to-date energy code, then it comes with enforcement. And I know that that's a whole other challenge. Enforce energy efficiency requirements during plan review and approvals by training plan reviewers and building inspectors and cultivating the department's capacity to enforce the letter and spirit of building code, energy code provisions. Incentivize blower door tests and duct leakage testing in all new construction, train building code personnel to evaluate manual J and manual D submissions in order to meet energy efficiency targets. So looks like we have some good, hey, Andrew and Robert.
Hi.
So we have some good language here about energy codes. For those of you who are joining, we're kind of struggling on this one in terms of, what's the readiness status of facilitating energy code adoption?
We're on 2.3. So.
Yes, sorry. Objective 2.3. And, do you guys have any thoughts? We have some good language in here to work with from the notes and comments and some relevant legislation. But based on your experiences coming from your organizations, do you have any thoughts on energy codes, stretch codes, updates? capacity, enforcement, partners?
A lot of that should be taking place during the normal sort of building design and review process. I mean, if you start out, which most of our projects going forward should be, probably LEED certified projects, then that should be considered in the design phase from the outset, but the architect and his mechanical subconsultant, and then obviously the building commissioner's office, when they're reviewing a building permit and electrical permits, plumbing permits, they should be looking at that as well.
Okay.
And then you're going to have a formal commissioning process, in the project. So
Mhm. Okay. Any equity gaps on this one? Energy code? That could be addressed?
The gap that's addressed is higher than necessary energy costs. And I'm talking about residential construction here, where the current model code that this speaks to, the IECC, has been demonstrated to provide lower total cost of ownership or occupation costs compared to some other energy code. So what I call a subpar energy code. So it reduces energy burden. I guess that might be the simplest way to put it for all, and sets a what's been demonstrated as best in class minimum threshold for energy performance for new residential buildings.
Great. Any implementation partners on this one that you guys can think of?
The community organizations working on this statewide are the Virginia Energy Efficiency Council, and the Responsible Energy Codes Alliance is a national group that's very active here. Veridient does a lot of work in the zone as well on energy codes as far as training around the state. We have lots of resources for localities to make sure that they understand the science behind the codes, that they are truly enforcing what's in the code to the benefit of the future occupants.
Great, thank you. Anything else that anyone, looks like we're all back in the main room, so we're just wrapping up energy code enforcement. Anyone has any thoughts, feel free to throw them out. All right, well then I think we were successful. It looks like we got through all of our strategies. Does anyone want to report back on what some takeaways, how that went? Feel good about it? All right, I'll take that as a yes. So, Brianne, would you like to introduce this Menti poll?
Sure. So as we're thinking about the next meeting for the working groups, which will be the final part of this conversation around implementation and accountability, a piece of this, which is very important as we think about indicators for success of the plan, and also how we hold ourselves accountable for the implementation. We wanted to hear from you all on when you would like to have this meeting, knowing that the next meeting is currently scheduled for the week of August 23rd, but this is end of summer. You all have done a ton of work over the summer, and we know people might be on vacation, wrapping things up as we prepare for fall, all of that. So if you will, either on your browser in a new window, or you can just go on your phone if you have it available to menti.com. You can type in this code and just do a very quick poll on whether you prefer to have this meeting as scheduled the week of August 23rd, or would like to push it back to mid-September. That is the question. There is an option as well as, doesn't matter. Either of those works for me. We do have some results from our working group meeting we had yesterday with environment, and we'll also be asking the other working groups later this week. So as results come in, I can see them and can share with you all how it's looking.
All right, well, as those are coming in, there is another survey that Wendy put in the chat, and that's to give us some feedback on how we're doing. What do you think of this planning process? What do you think about where we are? Any thoughts on how we could do it better? Or if you just have some questions or ideas, we would love to hear them. It can be anonymous, or you can let us know that you have some specific feedback that you'd like to discuss with us, and we're happy to meet with you one-on-one if that's better. Otherwise, that's it for today. If you have any updates from your own organizations or upcoming events or resources you'd like to share with the others in this group, feel free to put it in the chat or call it out. And Brianne, what are you finding?
So it looks like right now, most people are saying that either works for me, but as I said that, we had a couple more votes come in for September, so I'm gonna wait maybe one more minute and then I can share, put in the graph of responses so people can see.
Okay. All right, well, we did finish up early today, so you guys get an extra half an hour or so back to your day. But again, thanks so much for getting through this process with us. I know that was a real mental task to walk through those strategies and not just think about next steps, but think about equity. How can we really go the extra mile to center equity in our plan? All right, well, it looks pretty close, but either works for me is generally what wins. So Andrew put a note in the chat, tune in to the next Solarize event with the date and time. Andrew, do you want to tell them what that's all about, just to share?
Yeah, because it's a partnership with y'all. Veridian and the City Sustainability Office and Energy Management Office in Henrico are partners in Solarize RVA, which is a public education effort to help people really become smart shoppers for solar. This is primarily about residential, so for folks own homes. So if you have questions about the economics, the technology, how it might work, we have a great, I deliver it, so I shouldn't say great, but I think it's a pretty good webinar all about it. And we connect folks with vetted local contractors who can give you a bid, and then we serve as your advocate through the whole process. So if you or anyone you know is curious about solar, this is your community resource to get your questions answered for free, including doing a pretty detailed feasibility study for your home. And while we promote solar, we also promote energy audits so that we don't make solar electricity just to waste it. Veridian offers energy audits to anyone for as low as $45. And for households that qualify, we connect them with Project Homes, who has resources for folks for households earning up to 120% of the state median income. So households earning up to $89,000 a year can get a free, a new heat pump, can get attic insulation for free from Project Homes. So there are a whole variety of qualifications. That's kind of the maximum best case scenario, but that is out there, those kinds of resources, and everything on down the line to their low income federal weatherization. So my continued drum, my beat, there is great free stuff out there. Tell your friends and neighbors.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew. Thanks for all you're doing too.
Thanks.
All right. So anyone else has something to share? If not, I will say bye-bye. Have a great day. I'll be on for a few more minutes if you want to stick around. Otherwise, I'll be in touch.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
you.
Thanks.
Bye.